What could the Ankh do? Now, the Ankh may be the most recognizable symbol to survive from ancient Kemet. We see it hanging from necklaces, we see it tattooed on bodies, we see it in films, comic books, fantasy games, spiritual spaces, and throughout Black American culture. It's commonly called the key of life, and because it's so familiar, most of us believe we already know what it means, which is life. But that answer creates a much larger question. What kind of life? Did the Ankh represent the spark that animates the body? Did it create fertility? Could it heal sickness, restore the dead, or grant immortality? When a god placed the Ankh against the nose or mouth of a king, was a deity literally giving him breath? And when we say that the Ankh could be used to speak life, are we describing an ancient Kemetic belief or adding a modern interpretation to it? If we treat the Ankh as a functioning mythological object, then what were its actual powers? The first thing we must understand, the Ankh was not ordinarily presented as a weapon. It was not a wand, a sword, or an ancient infinity stone. The gods did not swing it in combat or fire energy from it. The Ankh was something more fundamental. It was the visible sign of divine power to cause life, sustain life, restore vitality, and extend existence beyond death. But the Ankh was not a battery. It just showed us where the current of life was flowing. And when we look closely at the text, temple images, funerary art, and surviving objects, at least 6 working functions began to emerge. The Ankh animated life. It delivered breath and vitality. It sustained the living. It purified and renewed. It restored the dead, and it carried existence into eternity. Now, these were not 6 unrelated powers. They were 6 expressions of one enormous idea. Life could move between the divine and the human worlds, and the Ankh marked that transmission. What does the word Ankh actually mean? Before looking at the symbol as an object, we must look at it as a language. The Ankh sign represented a sequence of Kemetic consonants, usually transliterating as Ankh. It appears in words meaning life, to live, alive, or living. It related causative form meant to cause someone to live, to nourish, or to sustain life themselves. This is important because the meaning life is not a guess based on the symbol's shape. It is demonstrated by the Kemetic language itself. This sign could appear in royal formulas or blessings. One of the best known combinations is Ankh Wajet Sednem, meaning life, prosperity, or soundness, and health. Together, these words express a complete condition of thriving existence. The Ankh could also join 2 other major signs, the Jaded pillar, representing stability and endurance, and the Wa scepter, representing power and dominion. Life, stability, power. If these were translated into modern fantasy language, they would look like 3 divine attributes. The Ankh supplied existence, the Jet prevented the existence from collapsing, the Wa gave it authority and force. But the Ankh was more than a word written inside an inscriptions. Kemetic artists transformed this symbol into an object that could be held, offered, received, poured, and transmitted. This does not mean that every image should be treated as a photograph of something Kemetic people believe actually happened. A god holding an Ankh communicated something in the way that writing the word life communicated something. The difference is that the image allowed life to become active. The Ankh could be moved towards a person. It could touch the nose, it could travel through sunlight, it could appear inside streams of water. It could be received from a god. This symbol had become a verb. Power 1. Animation. Causing life to begin. The first power of the Ankh is animation, the transition between an unanimated condition and a living one. This is the closest that we come to the idea of a divine spark. The Kemetic language did not limit Ankh to a passive condition of being alive. Related forms could describe causing something or someone to live. The concept therefore included action. Life was not only possession, it was something that could be produced, given, or awakened, and this requires a distinction. The Ankh was not normally described as independently creating the universe. Creation belonged to creator gods and their particular theological traditions. Atum emerged from Nu and brought differentiation from the undivided waters. Ptah conceived creation in the heart and expressed it through the tongue. Khnum formed living bodies upon a potter's wheel. Amun and Ra generated and sustained the ordered world through their own divine manifestations. The creator deity was the source. Creation was the action. Living existence was the result. The Ankh was a signature placed on that result. This makes animation broader than childbirth, but more precise than universal creation. It is the moment when organized matter becomes a living being, when the body is no longer merely a form, but possesses breath, awareness, movement, and vitality. In modern terms, the Ankh would not necessarily build a body out of nothing. It is the power would be to cross the threshold between that form and actual life. This could mean awakening a body made by Khnum. It could mean reviving a being whose life had departed. It can mean charging an image, statue, or sacred form with active presence during ritual. The mythic principle is simple. The Ankh does not manufacture the vessel, it introduces the condition that makes the vessel live. This is also where fertility enters discussion, not only as one expression of a larger power. Fertility generates life, sexual union, conception, pregnancy, childbirth, vegetation, cattle, and the flooding Nile all participate in the continuation of life. The Ankh could therefore accompany fertility and regeneration. But the Ankh itself was not narrowly a fertility emblem. There is no need to reduce it to a diagram of sexual organs or to declare that its loop and crossbar definitively represent male and female anatomy. These interpretations may carry modern symbolic meaning, but they are not securely established as the sign's original explanation. Fertility was a chamber within the house of life. The Ankh represented the entire life. The working function. The power to animate a prepared form, awaken dormant vitality, or cause a transition into living existence. Power 2 was breath, delivering vitality and conscious presence. The second power is the clearest in surviving energy, the gift of breath. Again and again, a deity holds an Ankh before the nose or mouth of a king. During the Amana period, hands at the end of Aten's rays extend Ankhs towards the faces of Akhenaten, Nefertiti, and members of the royal family. The location is not accidental. Breath is the immediate evidence of life. A breathing body is present in the world. When breathing stops, life appears to depart. The nose and mouth therefore become gateways through which divine vitality enters the human body. In these scenes, the god not only is simply presenting the king with a decorative symbol, the image communicates that every breath of the king depends on the divine world. The Ankh may therefore represent air, but not air as an ordinary gas. It is air understood as living substance, the breath that carries vitality, consciousness, and the continued ability to function. This helps us understand what breath of life actually means. It is not merely oxygen. It is the complete condition expressed through breathing, awareness, energy, presence, and participation in the ordered world. The Aten scene makes this relationship especially vivid. The solar disk sends down rays of light. Those rays end up in hands. Some hands hold Ankhs to the royal nose and mouth. Life becomes touch. Touch becomes breath. Breath becomes life. The entire image of circuit connecting the solar deity with the living body. This also reveals a limitation. The Ankh is most often given by a deity to the king or deceased. It is not usually a human possession that generates endless life by itself. Authority flows downward from the source of life toward the recipient. To hold the Ankh is therefore to participate in divine life, but to receive it is to acknowledge dependence upon that divine source. Translated into working supernatural ability, the Ankh could restore breathing, revive consciousness, strengthen exhausted vitality, or sustain someone in an environment where ordinary breath had failed. But its deeper meaning could remain spiritual. Breath is the bridge between the invisible power and visible life. The power to transmit breath, restore consciousness, replenish vitality, and maintain the living presence of the recipient. Now, power 3 is sustenance, keeping life alive. The third power of the Ankh is not as dramatic as resurrection, but it may be more important. It is itself sustenance. Creating life is not enough. Life must be continually supported. The body requires food, water, air, warmth, health, and protection. Kemetic religion did not imagine creation as an event that happened once and then took care of itself. The ordered world had to be renewed and maintained. The sun had to rise again. The Nile had to return. Offerings had to be made. Ma'at had to be upheld. The forces of disorder had to be pushed back. Life existed because divine and ritual work continued. This is why the Ankh is frequently shown in the hands of deities. It is identified not merely as beings who happen to be immortal, but as possessors and distributors of life itself. When a deity offers the Ankh to the king, the image can authorize his continued reign. The god sustains the body that must perform sacred duties, defend order, maintain temples, and stand between the human community and the divine realm. Royal life was therefore political and cosmic at the same time. If the king failed, the danger was larger than one man losing a throne. The human center of ritual order had been weakened. To give the king life was to keep the system functioning. This is where the Ankh becomes a symbol of nourishment. A related Kemetic verb could mean to cause to live or to nourish. Food and offering were not merely fuels. These were the mechanisms through which life continued. In the funerary world, the dead also required substance. Their continued existence depended on offerings of bread, beer, water, incense, and spoken formulas, or upon the magical substitutes when living descendants could no longer provide them. The Ankh therefore governs not just the beginning of life, but its duration. In modern power language, sustenance would appear as healing, regeneration, resistance to exhaustion, extended longevity, and the ability to preserve another being's life force. But healing must be handled carefully. The Ankh signified health and life, and an Ankh amulet could express the wish for continued life. That does not mean that every Ankh was understood as a medical device capable of curing any disease. The defensive claim is broader. Anything that nourished, stabilized, or prolonged life existence could fall within the Ankh's field of meaning. This is the quiet power behind all the others. Animation begins life. Sustenance refuses to let life fade. The working function is the power to nourish life force, resist exhaustion and deterioration, support healing, and extend the duration of living existence. Now, power 4 is rooted in purification, washing away the conditions of death. The fourth power of the Ankh appears when life takes the form of water. In temple scenes, a deity may pour water over the king during ritual purification, but the streams are sometimes represented by repeated Ankh symbols, often combined with Wa symbols. The viewer is not simply seeing water, the viewer is seeing what water carries. Life and divine power pour over the Nasut. The liquid removes impurities while replacing it with renewed sacred condition. This is an important distinction because purification is not the same as ordinary cleanliness. Ritual impurity represents a condition of disorder, limitation, contamination, or separation from the divine world. To purify the king is to make him capable of entering a sacred space, approaching a deity, and performing the actions that maintain the cosmos. The Ankh-shaped water therefore performs two movements at once. It washes away something and it puts something back. It removes impurity and restores life. It clears disorder and installs sacred power. It renews the person so that he can return to divine service. That makes purification a kind of controlled rebirth. The person who emerges from the water is physically the same individual, but ritually he has entered into a renewed state. The old contamination has been separated from him. His proper relationship with the gods has been restored. We can also see why water, air, and sunlight can all be represented through the Ankh. They are not competing definitions. They are different carriers of the same quality. Water sustains life, air sustains life, solar warmth and light sustain life. The Ankh identifies the living power within each of them. Translated into a supernatural system, purification would allow the Ankh to remove corruption, spiritual pollution, poison, hostile magic influence, or anything that interferes with the proper flow of life. This would not necessarily make it a generic weapon against evil. Its governing rules would be restoration to the correct living condition. The Ankh does not destroy simply because something is unpleasant. It clears whatever prevents life from functioning according to order. This working function is the power to remove ritual or spiritual corruption, cleanse hostile influences, and restore a person to a renewed condition compatible with divine order. Now, Power 5 lies in restoration, reassembling life after death. Now, the fifth is the one that makes the Ankh inseparable from funerary religions, restoration after death. A person was not merely a body containing an invisible ghost. Kemetic traditions describe multiple dimensions of personhood: the physical body, the Ka, the Ba, the name, the shadow, the heart, and the transformed Ankh, among other concepts. Death threatens separation and disintegration. The body could decay. The name could be forgotten. The Ka could go without nourishment. The Ba could lose access to the body. The heart could testify against the deceased. The different components of the person might fail to reunite successfully. Funerary ritual fought against that collapse. Mummification preserved the body. Offerings sustained the Ka. Spells protected the name, heart, shadow, and mobility of the deceased. The opening of the mouth ceremony restored the ability to breathe, speak, see, hear, and receive nourishment. Within this system, giving life to the dead did not simply mean reversing a biological death as if nothing had happened. It meant restoring function. The deceased had to breathe again in a transformative sense. The mouth had to open. The limbs had to move. The senses had to operate. The person had to recognize names, pass gates, receive offerings, and participate in the world of the gods. The Ankh belongs naturally within this restoration because it marks the return of effective existence. The dead person does not necessarily return to the village and resume ordinary life. Instead, death is converted from dissolution into another form of existence. This is why resurrection is useful but incomplete. The Ankh's power is not simply to restart a corpse. It is to reestablish the network of relationships and functions that allow the person to exist. In a modern fantasy setting, this would be far more sophisticated than simple necromancy. Necromancy often animates dead matter or enslaves a departed spirit. The Ankh would restore identity, breath, memory, agency, and spiritual coherence. It would call the scattered parts of the person back to relationship, and that distinction matters. An undead body may move without truly living. The Ankh represents the return of life itself. The power to restore the separated components of personhood, return lost faculties, and transform death from dissolution into effective living existence. Now, power 6 lies in continuation, carrying life into eternity. This sixth power is continuation beyond ordinary human limitation. The Ankh is commonly described as a symbol of eternal life, and that statement is broadly correct. but it becomes richer when we ask what eternal meant within this Kemetic religious belief. Eternity was not simply an endless straight line of identical days. Kemetic thought could distinguish different modes of everlasting duration, repeated cyclical renewal associated with the rising sun, and the enduring completed permanence associated with the stable realm of the dead. The successful deceased participated in both. Like a Sar, the person could endure within the transformed realm of the dead. Like Ra, the person could renew life through the recurring solar cycle. The deceased could go forth by day, travel, receive offerings, join divine company, and continue as an effective spirit. The Ankh therefore did not promise mere survival. It promised that death could no longer permanently cancel. This is why the Ankh becomes especially powerful when paired with the Jed. Life alone can be fragile. Stability gives life endurance. Add the Was, and enduring life gains power and domination. Together, they form a complete formula. Exist, endure, exercise power. The Ankh's final power is therefore not invulnerability in the comic book sense. Kemetic funerary texts reveal too many dangers for us to imagine that the afterlife was automatic. The deceased still required knowledge, preparation, protection, nourishment, judgment, and divine favor. The Ankh represents the desired victory, continuity achieved despite the threat of death and disorder. Translated into a working supernatural ability, continuation would preserve the essential self across time, bodily transformation, spiritual travel, and death itself. It could protect the name from erasure and the identity from dissolution. This may be the highest form of immortality, simply that the body cannot be injured, but that the person cannot be reduced to nothing. The working effect is that the power to preserve identity and effective existence across death, transformation, and the passage of time. Now, does the Ankh mean to speak life? As a direct translation, it does not. The Ankh means life, living, or related ideas such as causing to live. It does not mean speech, but speaking life can still describe a genuine Kemetic principle if we state it carefully. In the Kemetic religion, spoken and written words could perform actions. Ritual speak was not merely a commentary about what a priest hoped would happen. Correctly spoken words participated in making the result real. The theology of Ptah expresses creation through the heart and tongue. The heart conceives, the tongue declares. The ordered world takes that form. Funerary spells give the deceased names, identity, protections, and capabilities. The opening of the mouth restores speech itself as a renewed existence. To speak could therefore be creative, protective, restorative, or transformative. This allows us to say, the Ankh does not linguistically mean speech, but the ritual speech could cause life, protection, or restore life, and the Ankh could represent the living condition that those words produce. To speak life is therefore a valid mythic interpretation, not a literal dictionary definition. And that distinction strengthens the idea rather than weakening it. It places the Ankh inside a larger Kemetic understanding of Heka, the power through which words, images, names, materials, and ritual actions shape reality. The Ankh shows life. The sacred utterance directs its arrival. Now, how the Ankh was actually used, we can now identify 4 overlapping levels of use. First, it was a symbol, meduneche. It wrote words associated with living and life. Iconographic attribute. A god holding the Ankh visibly possessed the authority to give and maintain life. Third, it was active ritual energy. The sign can be offered through the nose, carried by solar rays, or manipulated inside streams of purification water. In these scenes, life moves from one realm or being into another. Fourth, it can exist as a physical object. Ankh-shaped amulets, pendants, mirrors, decorative forms, and ceremonial implements materialize the wish for life, renewal, and divine favor. But even physical Ankhs do not all perform one standardized magical operation. Context matters. An Ankh inscribed with the royal name, an Ankh worn as an amulet, an Ankh shown in a temple relief, and an Ankh used to write a word may participate in the same field of meaning without functioning identically. This is when asking, what did the Ankh do, produces more than one answer. It wrote life, it represented life, it transferred life, it protected the promise of life, it made invisible life force visible to the human eye. Now, the ancient Kemetic state eventually disappeared, but the Ankh did not. Its shape survived, changed, traveled, and gathered in new communities. In modern culture, the Ankh has become more than an archaeological symbol. It has become a declaration of ancient civilizations, the knowledge they possessed, their spiritual systems, writing, science, kingship, architecture, and complex ideas about existence long before other parts of the world defined that continent. Wearing the Ankh can therefore mean I recognize ancient civilizations. I reject the idea of where history begins. I reclaim a relationship with ancient intellectual and spiritual inheritance. The modern use does not require every wearer to participate in ancient Kemetic religions. Cultural identity and religious devotion can overlap, but they are not identical. For some, the Ankh is sacred. For others, it is historical. For still others, it is political. For many, it is all three. If we translate the 6 ancient functions into a modern power system, an Ankh bearer could animate a prepared but lifeless form, restore breath and consciousness, nourish vitality and accelerate healing, purify poison, corruption, or hostile spiritual influence, reunite the shattered elements of a dead person, preserve identity against death, erasure, and time. Ankh would not be primarily a weapon of destruction. It would be an instrument of ontological authority, the power to determine whether life can begin, continue, recover, and endure. And that makes it more dangerous than a weapon. A sword controls whether a body is damaged. The Ankh controls whether the body remains part of the living order. The power itself was transmission. The Ankh did not have only one power because life is not only one thing. Life was breath entering the nose. Life was food sustaining the ka. Life was water cleansing the king. Life was sunlight descending from Aten. Life was the dead recovering speech, movement, memory, and identity. Life was the successful person continuing beyond the grave without dissolving into nothing. The Ankh gathered all these processes into a single visual symbol. The deepest power was its transmission. The gods held the Ankh because they possessed life beyond ordinary human limitation. The king received it because his authority depended upon divine sustenance. The deceased sought it because death had interrupted life, but it had not necessarily defeated it. The Ankh was not simply a promise that one would never die. It was the promise that death did not possess the final authority to define that existence. This may explain why the symbol has survived for thousands of years. Empires disappeared, languages fell, temples fell silent, religions transformed. The people who inherit the image gave it new names and placed it inside a new world. Yet the central desire remained recognizable: to live.